So, you like Regis, huh? These big hunks of whatever they're named after have been hidden away into the caves and crevices of the Pokémon world for over 20 years. Which is quite poetic when you think about it, because they've never really had their time in the spotlight. The Giants of Legend were kind of the first legendary trio not to be at the forefront of any major storylines. Think about it, by the time we hit the shores of Hoenn, we had the purposefully mysterious birds, who had the Lugia movie to themselves, and the beasts who wormed their way into the highly coveted box mascot slot. Well, we picked favourites there. But like I said, 20 years have passed, and the legendary trios were never quite the same after the Giants, despite doubling in their number. But I can't really wag my blaming finger at anyone this time. Naturally, the more of a special thing there is, the less special it seems. The scenario writers these days aim for more intentional storytelling techniques to help legendaries maintain that nostalgic hit they always had. Think of how the forces of nature were introduced in Black and White, or even the Treasures of Ruin side quest in Scarlet and Violet. But have these lugs of chunks been left to the wayside because of that? In today's case, the Giants of Legend have been through a lot, and yet nothing at all. So let's recap what we know from the video games before I write a new legend for them to feel just that bit more legendary. To TLDR the Giant of Legends lore, Regigigas was the great bringer of continents, carrying countries on ropes. To protect the life built on those countries, Regigigas created several giants in their image: Regice, Regirock, Registeel, Regieleki, and Regidrago. Throughout thousands of years, the giants did just that, being worshipped by the people, the same people that began to fear them and their power. So naturally, they sealed them into caves, locked behind puzzles, waiting for the day humanity would need them again. Not too beefy for humanity's saviors, right? That's what, less than a high school essay? Well, this has always been my thing with them. They've never been given the importance that the game seems to imply with them, especially with the additions of Regieleki and Regidrago, who are supposedly stronger than the initial trio, without much justification. I have my theories, but let's go over the real stories behind these guys to get the full picture. Let's start with the big one. Regigigas is the leader of the Giants of Legend. They are a massive towering continent-building golem. Remember that word for later. Golem. As a legendary Pokémon debuting in the Sinnoh region, of course there are inspirations from Japan and Greece hidden behind those vacant eyes. Let's take a look at this guy. This is Daidarabochi, a giant yokai said to rest as the mountains in Japan, watching people from afar. This is a figure that might be derived from Omitsunu, grandson of one of the great Shinto gods Susanoo, and just like Regigigas, grew the land of Izumo using great ropes to sew the landmasses together. There's also some story design influence from the Titanomachy. In this ancient Greek war, Zeus and the Olympian gods fought a 10-year war against the Titans, their godly predecessors. After winning the war, Zeus sealed them in the Tower of Tartarus, guarded by the Hecatoncheires, 300-headed and armed giants. Oh look, a segue. I never liked these. The original giants, Regice, Regirock, and Registeel, yeah, it's Regice, do you see another eye? No, move on! Set a precedent in their concepts. They represent different eras of prehistory: the Ice Age, Stone Age, and Iron Age. Which, side note, could mean that Regigigas represents the Golden Age or Heroic Age of the Greeks. Anyway, to give you the rundown, Ice Ages are the eras where the planet's surface temperature was cold enough for glaciers and ice sheets to grow. Stone Ages are the eras where, simply enough, stone was used as our primary source of tools, followed by the Iron Age and the introduction of minerals and smithing, capping off the last era of prehistory. And then came the new kids on the block: Regieleki and Regidrago. And of course these two also represent eras, being the modern age where electricity was fully realised by inventors, and then it gets a bit murky between Regidrago being the Middle Ages or the Age of the Dinosaurs. I think it could be both. See, with these two, we're told explicitly they are stronger than the other trio. They were forged by Regigigas with constraints built into their bodies, like Regieleki's non-conductive parts and Regidrago's shell. To me, this shows that they aren't just an evolution of this era concept, but of what humanity needed as it evolved. They represent energy. Which is clear enough if you take 2 seconds to read the damn Pokédex entries. Sorry. Regieleki is simple enough. They're electricity, making other forms of energy obsolete for a variety of basic needs. Regidrago, though, that's where it represents 2 different eras. Regidrago's crystallization of dragon energy could be an analogy for fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. These fuels are more perishable, as they are condensed ancient fossils burned as powerful sources. In today's climate, these fossil fuels are becoming increasingly scarce and sought-after resources. Don't be smug, your time will come too. But if all of these giants are so helpful, why would we seal them away? Well, that's where the story of the Golem takes center stage. All of the giants take their primary inspiration from this creature, the Golem of Prague. It's a more contemporary story from the 16th century, where there are a few variations, but the gist of it revolves around how the chief rabbi of Prague, Rabbi Lowe, wanted to make things less scary for the Jewish settlers who had made their life there, defending them from prejudice. So he built a man from clay and mud and used mysticism to inscribe the Hebrew word emet into his head, meaning truth. Symbolic, really, considering the 3 letters used are the first, middle, and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Immediately, the creature was brought to life. Rabbi Lowe told the Golem his duties, to protect the Jewish people of Prague, and he did exactly that after some soldiers started causing some trouble. Because of this ruckus, the Emperor summoned Rabbi Lowe, calling for no more soldiers to attack the Jews. The Golem had done its job, and after months of no attacks, the rabbi removed the first letter from his head, leaving the Hebrew word for death, sealing the Golem in an attic to wait to be needed again. This is the role that Regigigas created for the giants. However, it seems humanity decided when they no longer needed them. In fact, fearing them, which is how some tales of the Golem ended too. But what might have driven them to seal away these guardians? What could they have done? Well, when we have 6 legendary Pokémon to cover in one story, I suppose we have to remember the key points here. The different eras, what they gave humanity, and their relationship with humanity. Now, how am I going to turn all of that into a nice little... Oh, look at that! The story's done cooking, and it's in this cassette-shaped mess now. I'm something of a creator myself. So, let me tell you a story about the kings of ancient times, and how humanity would usurp their throne. Let me know what you think. I care a lot. A lot. Oh, it's starting. Before our world was molded in its imperfect artistry, the King of Kings dragged it through torrents and squalls. In its sense and design, this king grew a fondness for these masses it built from its strength, and saw the feeble humans grow from the soil onto land. The king that once came from nothing, it began to love. At the beginning of our time, the king would lay atop the mountainscape and simply gaze at us. We began in disarray. We clobbered our fists against the verdant greenery and plucked at the foliage that hid beneath. We were very, very simple, and the king enjoyed that. From the king's perch, a chill came from its shoulder. A great frost began to eat our food. The rime took the clean water that filled our stomachs. This would not do. And so the king built an heir from the ice. A great giant that was born from the King of Kings, christened with a cross of topazine eyes. We would come to worship the King of Crystal Ice. This king, who was born to protect us from the cold's harsh bearing, took our pelts and taught us how to craft warm cloaks. The shards it struck from its spine bore into the wells and freed flowing streams. The beasts that came from beneath deep snows feared the tenacity of the walking iceberg's stern, cold fist. For the king that sat above, watching over and interfering none, it watched as the thawing winds glazed over the horizon, and generations were born under the reign of the king of crystal ice. Those generations came to forget the king's lessons. They began to not need their liege's hope. They began to fear the very spines that pierced through the hunt. They lured the king into a cave that stood frozen in time and took one of its topazine eyes. In that cave it would slumber, and the King of Kings watched. When the land began to tear and cracks snuck through the sediment, the shakes and quakes shook us like the trees we'd harvest. The King of Kings saw children scream and scream and scream. This would not do. And so the king built an heir from the crags that fell, christened with a cross of amber eyes. We would come to worship the King of Cragrock. This king, who was born to shield and drive us from such dangerous disarray. We would follow it. We split our numbers into the countries we would give names to much, much later. Through its might, we learned how to weaponize the shattered land. Through its tenacity, we learned how to crush and crumble beneath our strength. For the king that sat above, watching over and interfering none, it watched as the green grass grew again, and generations were born under the reign of the King of Cragrock. Those generations came to usurp the king's crafts, discovering a glimmer beneath the shards that would be mightier than any stone. They forgot the king's authority, luring it into a cave so perfect and dull, and they took one of its amber eyes. In that cave, it would slumber, and the King of Kings watched. With the slivers of silver that turned our tides, humanity found a stronger foundation to build itself upon. The King of Kings saw how we struggled to bend it to our wants and needs, how we would craft useless tools and waste these precious metals. This would not do. And so the king built an heir from these minerals, christened with a cross of agatine eyes. We would come to worship the king of ore metal. This king, who was born to teach and evolve our craftsmanship, was stern, cold. It took our palms and blistered them with days of honing the blacksmith's skills. From the forge came picks and blades and mills and endless interconnecting pieces that would one day come to build modern society as we know it. For the king who sat above, watching over and interfering none, it watched as the people grew faster, as we built towns and cities and monuments, and faster than the king of ore metal, who persisted. The people began to find the king cumbersome. Its teachings were no longer teachings. The parents and grandparents and great-grandparents taught quicker and more precisely. They taught their children about how the great kings were sealed deep in caverns far from society's whims, and those children would be the same ones to put their king to rest, taking one of its agatine eyes. In that cave it would slumber, and the King of Kings watched. Humanity grew. It needed. They began craving for new, innovative little things. They began to burn the ice and the rock rocks and the metals and the flora and discovered a flame that would heat hearths and save lives. The King of Kings saw how they wasted the great gift. They were overconfident, overzealous. This would not do. And so the king built an heir from the bones of history, the oils that secreted, the air that was dense and dangerous. It was christened with a cross of Larimar eyes. We would come to the reckoning under the King of Fury. This king, who was born to quell their hubris, taught them how to give their machines life without such blatant waste, taught them which fuels provided a great power to their cities. Their forges grew mouths the size of this king's maw. Their inventors turned dunces as they realized their folly in thought. For the king that sat above, watching over and interfering none, it watched as the people grew a laze in their canter. They began to let the machines farm their crops. They began to let the king's breath fan the flames. This brought the King of Fury to a place of contempt for its people, a place of raising 1,000 villages, a place of many lost to the flames. When the great storm came, it left behind no sign of the great blaze, but a single Larimar eye lay outside of a closed mouth, where a hero laid a king to rest. In that cave it would slumber, and the King of Kings watched. It took time to heal. They rebuilt their towns on a promise for the future. The inventors created with caution the further from the past they became. A spark, a single spark, harbored an unfathomable hope. The sparks that would only ever fall sporadic from the sky, now in the palm of humanity, untamed. This would not do. And so the king built an heir from the pulse that lives within all and above. A king who would not hesitate to tame as its kin once did. Christened with a cross of pearlescent eyes, we would come to the reckoning of the King of Fastlight. This king, who was born to prevent humanity's inevitable collapse, was a stern watcher, an active participant, a punishing teacher. It watched carefully as humanity invented for problems they did not ever think of having. They borrowed from its wiry arms to find fast solutions where slowness was never really a flaw. They lured this king into hope, and they built a world upon its never-ending pulse. For the king that sat above, watching over and interfering none, it watched as its child was caged in feeble metals. It watched as humanity grew to usurp the power the king gave them. It watched as that king took their pride and struck them. It struck them in every home, in every place, in every lamp that came from its trickling circuitry. It struck them. When the lights came back on, the cage was charred, burnt, leaving one of its pearlescent eyes in a dark room that stank of rage. We do not know where it would slumber, and the King of Kings watched. Today we live. Today we believe we thrive. Today we believe we are a people united in name. But where is the king that brought us here? But where is this great king of kings that laid as the mountains we still paint. That king that grew a love for us and gave us its children. When did it stop enjoying that? Hi, I hope you liked my story. If you enjoyed my little mixtape, feel free to check out my other Pokemon lore and legend videos. And if you want to make me smile today, you can support me by liking the video you've just watched, or on Ko-fi, where you can not only donate, but download a copy of my book of Pokemon-inspired legends, Tales Once Lost. Follow my socials, subscribe to see what I get up to, and maybe, just maybe, we can see each other again.